Welcome everyone to No Forks Given. Today we have with us Dr. Julia Skinner. She is a food historian, founder of an organization called Root Kitchens that focuses on fermentation and food history education. She's the author of books like Afternoon Tea, A History, co-author of Our Fermented Lives with Sandra Katz, and an author of Essential Food Preserving. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Skinner.
Thank you.
PhD is in library and information sciences, right?
Yes.
How did you get to becoming a food historian? How did the connection work out?
So during my master's program, I studied rare books and book history. And so I was working with rare cookbooks. And so in the process of that, I started making recipes from them and kind of diving down research rabbit holes. And that's where I got here.
You've created a 2,000-year-old mead recipe, recreated it, right? What was that experience like?
It was actually really easy, because a lot of these traditional fermentation techniques, we're not necessarily using really specialized materials or anything. We're using, the kind of stuff that we would have had around. We're using things like, simple containers and, basic ingredients and combining them in ways that are delicious. And so 2,000-year-old mead is really just, honey and water and whatever kind of herbs and spices you might add in. It was very simple to make, and it was really good too. It's very tasty.
Oh, it tasted good?
Yeah.
Has it evolved that we need to learn, relearn? Is it an acquired taste, do you think? Have you tried other recipes?
I think some of them are definitely an acquired taste,
Yeah.
but a lot of them, our palates still recognize, things like pickles or mead or, different sweets and jams and things. But yeah, some of them, there's some things that are like flavor combinations we don't necessarily do anymore. Like there was one tart that I baked like years ago that was like a sweet pastry, but it had garlic in it. And it was from like the 1600s. And like it tasted good, but it was not something I think most people now would eat or like.
Yeah, I mean, and there are a lot of old dessert recipes, even from medieval times, that I've come across in Europe that have meat in them. There are certain concepts and combinations that are so alien to us, right? So what was, old books and then, food history. Is there any very unique recipe that you've uncovered in your ancient textbooks? I mean, you've given an example of this specific combination of flavors, but I'm just thinking of something that was really just surprised you.
So one of the first recipes that I ever worked with this one was from 1615. It was a recipe for quince marmalade. And so, as I'm sure you and your listeners know, quince is a kind of like a very firm tannic apple. And it, you usually cook it until it oxidizes and turns really red, but this particular recipe was for a marmalade that was cooked really quickly, so it kept a really light blonde color.
Yeah.
And that was interesting because I made it both ways, both by oxidizing it and by not. And I was surprised they actually tasted the same. So that was an interesting discovery. Yeah.
So when we're talking about the past, we're talking about foods, we're also talking about how we eat. And, my podcast is called No Forks Given because it's a bit of a nod to eating with your hands, And historically, I think all civilizations ate with hands. When did people start becoming very proper about the use of forks and knives? And can you talk a little bit about that?
So I am not an expert on like the history of table etiquette, but what I know is, we see, like you said, like around the world, many people still don't eat with forks and knives. And in Europe, I think they didn't until Middle Ages, early modern period. Like it was, relatively recent in the span of history. But people got really, really into etiquette during the Victorian period. You saw a lot of that, where you'd have all these different kinds of forks and knives. And Americans actually, even more so than Europeans, were really, really strict about etiquette. Like I think part of it was maybe an insecurity about being like, oh, we don't have this centuries old history we're drawing from. And so we're gonna be really, really strict about etiquette to try to make up for it.
And I mean, your book about tea, for instance, right? That the etiquette around tea drinking is, I think, from a culinary perspective, that is one food item that I think associates with etiquette a lot. And I'm talking English etiquette as much as, say, Japanese tea consuming etiquette and so on. There it's very different. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when you look at the history of tea, you look at it in England specifically because afternoon tea is an English convention.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I know you know this, but it's spread all over the world.
Yeah.
Thanks to English colonialism. Tea initially was very much a high, upper class expensive thing, and so there was a lot of objects and etiquette that went around it because it's the special expensive thing that you're sharing with people, and so you have to have it locked in its own little box, and you bring it out and have the special cups and all the things with it. And that sort of having specific objects to go with tea, right,
The whole
continued on.
paraphernalia of serving it becomes
Yeah, and then you have, once we kind of keep going and tea becomes somewhat more affordable, then you get all kind of the rituals of the different foods, and you get afternoon tea in the way that that adapts to different places around the world. But there's the core, stopping and having the tea with whatever snacks, but what the snacks are and what it looks like kind of varies depending place to place.
Yeah, so it is still something about community, right? There is something about community. In India, when the British got addicted to having tea and didn't want to rely on China, they had started growing it in India. For the longest time, they couldn't get the Indians to drink tea. And there was a very large concerted effort at educating them, which was like unheard of, in terms of the scale and the number of things that they did. However, Indians only started drinking tea when they made it their own. The way they make it, the recipe, there's a casualness to it, but it's community. I know my family, whenever we're sitting together, someone will order a cup of tea, which is very different from, say, my husband's family, because they grew up on the tea gardens that, with an overlap with the British as they were leaving. And they were used to the whole customary British style of tea service. Whereas my family, will drink 7-8 cups a day, but just so that they can sit around and chat. And it's made very differently and in a very Indian manner. So that's what I was thinking about, how interesting it was. So fermentation is an area of great interest for you. And in Our Fermented Lives, which is the name of your book, you've looked at fermented foods across cultures, right? You've talked about how fermentation has shaped human culture. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's an example, for instance, of fermented food that carries a whole community's history in a jar?
I mean, gosh, there are so many and so many rich traditions. It's like one of those things, you're like, you start down the rabbit hole and you're just learning about it for the rest of your life. Like there's no end.
Yeah.
One that immediately comes to mind is injera, the bread in Ethiopian food.
Yeah, I love it.
Spongy bread. I know, it's so good. But that, I mean, again, we're talking about something that's relatively simple to make, that is ubiquitous. Like a lot of people make it and serve it.
Yeah.
But then have their own variations. But it also is a tradition that's been carried on for centuries and is become sort of a bedrock of the culture. And I think we see that with fermentation and preserving traditions around the world.
Yeah. So fermentation then, because fermented foods are so much more tedious to make, right? And so there's a lot of, I think families pass their recipes and techniques down, and it's a lot of commitment. I know I grew up associating certain foods like that with my grandparents' homes. As the world was becoming faster and faster in the cities, I wasn't seeing a lot of it being made at home with the parents. But over time, I lost touch with it because I just associated with the grandparents. Now I find that there is a heightened sense of awareness about gut health, microbiomes, and people are looking into fermented foods. And now I'm re-looking at those foods as fermented foods because I didn't, as a child, I didn't focus on technique. So when did our societies get so worried about bacteria? Was it back Was that the reason that we forgot fermented foods for such a long time and now are looking back at it? Or is there some other reason?
There's a few reasons. I think one of them has to do with, like you said, the pace of life. Like fermentation asks us to go at a different pace. It's not, it's not hard to do, but it's not instant. And we're in a very instant gratification moment.
Yeah.
But there's also, to your point about the bacteria, I mean, we had this period of time where, we discovered like, oh, one of the ways in which we can get sick is by pathogenic microbes. And then, so there kind of became a fear of all microbes. It's like, oh, like all of these must be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And we're now starting to have a little more nuance in the conversation where we recognize like pathogenic microbes and like, the microbes that make sauerkraut or, whatever are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And one of them is healthy for us. But for years, people were, and I mean, still are scared of bacteria. Like I have, every time I teach a fermentation class, at least one person is like, how do I do this so I don't get sick? Like, am I going to die if I make this wrong? And it's like no, like fermented vegetables are very, very safe. Like they're so safe to make, and you just have to follow some best practices. But it takes a lot of unlearning and relearning because we've been taught, microbes are bad, microbes make you sick.
So what's a super safe recipe that you would tell somebody who's a beginner? I mean,
I always start with something like just brine, so salt and water, room temperature, and then pour that over like some carrots or some, fresh green beans or, just some vegetable you want to pickle, and then start that way. Keep it under the brine, let it ferment for, however many days, 4 days, 10 days, depending how pickly you want it. And that's it. I mean, as long as you keep it under the brine and have the right amount of salt in the brine, like it will probably turn out pretty well.
And so when you looked at fermentation techniques across cultures, did you find fermentation being used across all cultures, or did you find a pattern where you felt that only certain kinds of cultures were using it?
So it's interesting because every culture uses at least one fermentation technique. And there are some places where you see it a lot more and some places you don't see it as much. So like, for example, I live in Ireland most of the year and there are fermentation. There's a lot of dairy fermentation there, for example, but you don't see as much like fruit and vegetable fermentation, or the variety rather of fruit and vegetable fermentation that you might see in like a more tropical place. So yeah, but it's everywhere. Like every place uses it.
As you study foods and culinary traditions, do you believe in the concept also that there's some sort of politics plays into some sort of a hierarchy as well in cuisines? Because I'm talking about how French food is artistry and maybe Indian, Chinese foods on that becomes, an exotic meal that you're very quickly. And the same thing when you apply to the world of fermentation. Very often when I started rediscovering some of these old dishes that I was forgetting, or some that are even mainstream, like injera, there's a dosa in South India, right? Which seems very familiar, but has different texture and so on. But they don't grab the attention. And do you think there is some sort of relationship between what foods grab attention in mainstream culinary studies and the status of those cultures or countries in the world, or is there some other dynamic at play?
No, I think absolutely. I mean, the way that established hierarchies, exist, view, European cultures as being like, the cultures, like here, here's like these, French food is the best and Italian food is the best. And, these are, kind of the pinnacle of cuisine. And then other cuisines are like seen as less than that, even though there are equally rich traditions, in Mexico and India and China, like all over the place. But yeah, I think, you certainly see that with cuisine in general. And, I think with fermentation to some extent too, because you see like the sort of ferments that we eat every day, it's like it's considered not special enough to be noteworthy. It's like a tradition that people don't think to write down because it's like, oh, everybody does it. Like everybody makes dosa or everybody makes, injera or whatever. Like there's so much of it around that it's like, whatever, like that's not, special, even though it is.
Yeah. And, but at the same time, for instance, Japanese food over time has managed to get that level of prestige around, that they can charge premium prices at restaurants. And at the same time, most of the premium cuisines at a given time in history tend to also have a lot of etiquette around it because then it starts becoming premium, right? I find that just watching right in front of my eyes how Korean food has become very fashionable and premium, almost pushed by governments. But I think there's also, and therefore all the fermented Korean dishes like kimchi, etc., have also become very fashionable, right? So I feel like if it's not just the status of a country becoming more relevant economically, it is some push by the government, etc. But you've also written about food security, inequality, and some of those aspects, right? And about appropriation. To you, I mean, where is that line between, say, cultural exchange and appropriation? Especially when it comes to traditional foods. Like, how do you think about that? Because you're constantly exchanging ideas, there are groups that are migrating. When does it stop becoming? And then there's limitation of ingredients. So there's appropriation, but there's also modification. So how do you think about it?
I think it has to do at least partly with intent. I think it's very, it's a nuanced conversation, but I think, appropriation is like, me as a white person from America coming in and saying like, "Ooh, you make this thing. I like it. I'm gonna take this." Like it has this very like colonizing sort of like, "Oh, this is mine now. I'm taking this and I'm either not acknowledging or I'm not." Yeah, like there's some way in which I'm pretending like I discovered this and
Okay.
I'm making this new, as opposed to being like, "Hey, this was an exchange. Somebody taught me how to do this." Or these ingredients are now being, imported into the place I live and I'm working with them and learning about them. It feels like it gets down to that intent of like, are you learning and exchanging or are you taking?
Food waste. You've also been a big advocate against food waste. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, there is a lot of wastage of food in the world, and technically, the world produces 2 or 3 times the amount of food that is needed to feed the 8 billion people that live on this planet, and yet so many go hungry. So, what exactly is, what is your thought on that?
I mean, I think, I primarily work with food waste at the like consumer and household level. So like what we can do, ways I can repurpose scraps, ways you can, repurpose, peels and tops and things from vegetables, that kind of stuff. And I think that's really important. And that's, more within my purview because I'm a culinary educator. But
Yeah.
I think the biggest part of this conversation to have is how much of that waste is done in a way that's like beyond our control as individuals, whether it's, large grocery conglomerates or agricultural firms like wasting things in order to do pricing control or, stuff like that. So I think there's a few levels to that conversation.
So, what is that food scrap that you think 99% of the people throw away that you would advise that they don't?
So I am a big fan, and this is like the example I always use in classes and things. Is carrot tops. You basically can use them like parsley. And I think, a good number of people do use them, but a lot of people are just like, "Oh, like that's, I want the carrot." Like that just, the tops just go in the compost or something. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, you can make like a pesto out of them or you can use them,
Wow.
as a garnish. So yeah.
And then there's nutrition. You also save
Hmm.
on nutrition as well.
Yeah.
You've also talked about food as a tool for human connection and memory. I mean,
Hmm.
reviving historic dishes, of course, you've lost a connection and you're jumping a gap. But
Hmm.
is there a stranger's dish that you have had, which is not something that you thought you would be familiar with, but that has connected to your own sense of identity in any way?
So there's a dish that I had, gosh, what was it, about a decade ago. It's not as common. It used to be more common in Scotland.
Yeah.
And it's basically this beverage made out of like leftover bits from harvesting and milling oats. And it was interesting because the first time I had it, the flavor was very familiar to me, even though I had
Yeah.
never had it before. Like,
So, I mean, you've referred to spending time between Ireland and the United
mhm,
States. So, how does that change your definition of home food? I mean, identity, I feel, is so closely tied to food and flavors and
mm.
therefore the connection with memory. How do you then think of home food?
I feel like it's an evolving definition the more time I spend. I find when I come back to the US, I get really like there's certain foods that I can't really get in Ireland that I'm just like, "Oh, I have to go get, like soup dumplings, and I have to go get Ethiopian food, and I have to go get like submarine sandwiches and like all these like, and I go and
Yeah.
get all these things. And so part of home food is like engaging with that unique, with foods that I can only get in one place or the other.
Yeah.
But then I'm also finding there are things that have become kind of the anchor foods.
Yeah.
Like I have my sourdough starter and my yogurt starter I have on both continents. It's the same starter. I just brought some of it over to Ireland as well.
Okay.
And so those have ended up kind of being the anchor for that because the ingredients I can get aren't always the same. And the diversity of food in the US, is greater than in Ireland. And so, but the kind of core components of my diet remain the same.
Yeah, I can relate to it because my kids are born and raised in the US, but at a very early age, I started leaving them in India for the summer months.
Mm,
So when they would come back, they would, from their airport, they'd want to, my son would want his root beer and a hot, like plain margarita pizza. He wanted it just that way. It became a thing. And then there were things that everybody had to receive him with when they went to India. And then he started writing about Indian food and had a podcast on it. So somewhere, I think those two strains of being American, but having some sort of an Indian identity is going to merge because food is his language. For my daughter, it's a little different. So each
mm,
person finds their sort of range. So it's interesting how you're, evolving yours.
yeah.
If you have to pick one historical preservation technique that you think that people in modern day kitchens desperately need to bring back, what would that
I
be?
mean, I think there's a lot of techniques that we are using, but could be more widespread. I think, lacto-fermented vegetables is such an easy, versatile way to start playing with this stuff and to give yourself healthy food that doesn't cost a lot of money or require a lot of equipment to make. I feel like that's something everybody can do that I'd like to see more widespread.
Is there a food myth that you wish would die?
I mean, I think the myth that fermented foods are, or like fermented vegetables are like dangerous or gonna get you.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Is there a fermented food that you think everyone should try before they die?
Gosh, that's a hard question because I think there
Yeah.
are so many that are so good. When everybody should try. I mean, I think one that I've been really enjoying lately is tapache, fermented pineapple.
Wow. I've
Yeah,
never tried that. Now you got me
it's very good.
intrigued. And is that a tradition from a particular culture? I mean, how did you become aware of it?
Yeah, so I think the person I learned it from Mexico, but it's around Central America. You get different
Okay.
versions of it, but it's either alcoholic or not pineapple drink, and it's usually used making the scraps from cutting down pineapples.
Okay. In Goa, they have um alcoholic beverage called feni, which is also derived from, I mean, not from pineapple, but the palm tree that
Mhm.
they have there. And as Goanese food evolved with Portuguese influence, used to ferment a lot of, it's used to add to the recipes in most Goanese food, which
Mm,
is again unique to that little part of India, which is very interesting.
yeah.
And finally, I've just touched the surface of some of the areas that you're looking into, fermentation being a core interest of yours. Where should the listeners find your work?
So on social media, my handle is Bookish Julia, and you can then navigate to all my I have 3 other accounts for my culinary work and for the creative work and like book coaching that I do. And they can also find my newsletter at rootkitchen.com/newsletter.
Perfect. So thank you so much. It was really an interesting chat, but I'm going to
Yeah,
keep reading and following your work and see where this goes.
awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.